NZ Aerosports, Icarus Canopies, now Gyro. That's right, we've rebranded, and Gyro is our next generation. It honours our founder, as that's the name we knew him by, but Gyro also marks the start of a new chapter. And not to be biased, but it's going to be fucking epic. Long story short, we're more us than ever. So if you're new to the sport, or even a Sky God Ninja Turtle, welcome. I think our valiant leader Lucy, Gyro's daughter, says it best.
And we still got that fuck yeah attitude. Rebrand! Woo!
Rebrand woo indeed, Lucy. Anyway, head over to gyro.com for more info and get amongst you legends.
I was 19, broke, unemployed, and sold my girlfriend's canopy for drug money. So I thought I better sew her a new one. What a sentence, and what a story. This describes the humble yet outrageous beginnings of NZ Aerosports, the home of Icarus Canopies, in the words of our founder himself. From getting a paratrooper toy from his mom, watching parachutes at the DZ as a 6-year-old, jumping off the wharf with a parachute made from bed sheets, doing his first jump at 16, sewing his first canopy on a borrowed machine at 19, and starting to sell parachutes out of a garage in 1986, Paul Gyro Martin had an undying love for the sky. Our company started with one man with the wildest of spirits and a true blue sky dream, a renegade. In the time that Gyro created and ran the Icarus Canopies brand until he passed away in 2017, he pushed everything he had to its limits. We miss him, and we always will. Gyro is the next generation of NZ Aerosports. It honors our founder, of course, because it was the name we all knew him by, but Gyro the rebrand also marks the start of a new chapter, our next jump. Gyro is the space between sound and silence, art and science, chaos and calm. Gyro is a state of epic tranquility that transcends understanding. That moment, in the door, in free fall, mid-swoop, where nothing but the present exists. A perfect balance of euphoria and thrill. Gyro captures our passion for flying and our commitment to designing break-the-fucking-rules canopies that deliver pilots pure, wild flight. Hey gang, so I got a new book out. It's called The Upside of Fear, and it's exactly what you think it's about. It's about the good side of, well, getting scared. In it, we talk not only about the science and biology behind fear, but the psychology as well. And it's not just coming from me, it's coming from some of the best in the sport. Omar Alhigelan, Jeff Provenzano, Maxine Tate, and so many more have contributed their sometimes terrifying stories to the book to help you overcome your fear. So head to the lunaticfringepodcast.com. You're going to find the link to the book there, as well as the other books. It's available in ebook, paperback, hardback, and audiobook right now.
Coming straight from the cockpit, it's another episode of Lunatic Fringe with the fucking pilot.
Ready, set, go! Back in the can for another edition of the Lunatic Fringe podcast, and a friendly smiling face that didn't actually know this was going to be happening today. Who the fuck are you, and what do you do?
My name's Chloe Svolakos, and I am an athletic psychotherapist. I'm a social worker. I'm a skydiver, climb mountains. I also free dive, and I work in the community, but I also jump in the community.
So you're kind of busy.
So, yeah, sort of.
A few irons in the fire.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Sports psychotherapy. We're going to obviously dive a little deeper into that, but that is very niche.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I've heard that.
Is this something that is this specific to you, or are you a member of a small community throughout the world that does this kind of thing?
No, actually, so I have a background in social work, international social work, and around 2016, I got my first job in the district attorney's office in New York City. I was doing trauma work there, and at the same time, I started jujutsu. So I've been doing jujutsu for about actually this year is going to be 10 years. And at some point, I couldn't reconcile being an athlete while also working 9 to 5, just doing this kind of work. I also hit a ceiling. So I started conceptualizing like, how trauma ends up working with the body, not working with the body, kind of like limiting us from, feeling capable. And I saw that a lot in my clients, and it just kind of got me thinking. But at the time, like my priority was wanting to be an athlete, right? A competitive athlete in the jujutsu scene and be a practitioner in that way. And so I took a hiatus from working at all. And I vowed, because I loved my job so much, that I would never work for anybody else. I got my clinical, my supervising hours, my supervisory hours enough so I can open up my own private practice. So when I passed my boards, I kind of merged the two worlds together, where I was talking about, I've been doing, psychotherapy and trauma work for about 15 years now. And at the time it was what, like 10 years, you would say, 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. And I just really wanted to work with athletes. But the more that I got into skydiving, because I did skydiving a year after jujitsu. So if you think that I've been doing jujitsu for 10, skydiving for about 9 years, and the things that we see in the sport and the things that I've seen in all the different places, I mean, it just makes sense that there is an entity that holds space where people don't have to explain the oddities and the obscurity of their lifestyle to a therapist that just doesn't get it, is going to ask a lot of questions that are just going to redirect and get them off the track, because they're going to ask for like, impulsivity and like all these other things. That's not really the direction that a person needs to go. So I created this concept because I thought that it was important. And 4 years later, we have Alta Therapy.
I mean, it makes perfect sense that you would have something specific to a sport like skydiving because you cut through all the superficial bullshit.
Hmm.
All the questions that would have to be asked by a therapist that doesn't understand the average skydiver.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of baggage to unpack there, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're so superficial bullshit, but then also I'm still gauging for actual impulsivity issues. I'm gauging for depression. I'm gauging for anxiety. I'm gauging for for trauma. I'm gauging for everything that is clinically significant. But the ability to filter out my own biases as a person who wouldn't necessarily understand, but still ask intelligent, pointed questions to really help someone clinically is there, right?
Sure.
Because,
Well,
so yeah,
I would think from someone outside the sport, just looking in without much explanation, we kind of tick all of those boxes just as an average skydiver, right? I mean, cloudy days, we're depressed, we're anxious, we're impulsive in a lot of the things that we do. We're obviously risk takers to some degree. I mean, we literally kind of just are a laundry list of all of that stuff.
that's right. That's right. I mean, and then, you take base jumping, wingsuit base jumping, proximity, all of these other things, mountaineers and like what they do. It's hard to explain to other people the our purpose, our logic, but a lot of the conversations do cover that, right? Like the subjective reasons, the personal, deeply personal reasons why anyone does whatever they do, it has to come from that one individual. The second that you blanket it as you're an adrenaline junkie, you're losing, like visualization on that person, a
Sure.
spotlight on that person.
Sure.
So,
Well, I
yeah.
remember, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe reading years ago something that said people that are risk takers like skydivers and mountaineers and stuff just have just a slightly different chemical whatever going on, that we have less dopamine or we don't respond the same way to other people. And I remember being actually slightly offended by that possibility, because it removed the chance that I just learned to handle fear and high stress situations better than someone else might. And I never liked that it could just be some chemical thing that made me more predisposed to jumping out of airplanes.
I think that also negates the fact that we're adaptable, right? That human beings are able to learn, right? So it's not like you have 15,000 jumps and you don't have adrenaline. You absolutely have adrenaline. You've just habituated to the adrenaline. You've gotten comfortable with the feelings in your body and you're able to regulate additional pieces, additional aspects, like your own thoughts, your emotions are different. They'll fluctuate a little bit more. They're not stuck and fixated on fight or flight, so what I believe is that any human being, because at some point, not all of us had like a lineage, most of us don't have a lineage of like fathers and mothers who are skydivers, right? We get into it and then you learn, and then you end up having this as a life, and then all of a sudden your life completely changes and you're somewhere
Right.
in Nepal or Spain or whatever, and you're like, I don't know how I got here. This is awesome, right? So we're proving that it's possible, but also one of the most remarkable things about the extreme sports community is that we are a rich, a robust pool of human beings for, to really understand emotional regulation, even if people have mental health challenges, right? To understand the fight or flight response, to understand focus, to understand concentration or skill, using all of these kinds of cognitive abilities. But then we also have this very interesting relationship with living, mortality, death, dying. And whether it's conscious or unconscious, like you're exposed to it because inherently the definition of the extreme sports community is to play within a very small margin of error,
Mm.
right? Of course, that varies, right? And,
Sure.
depending on skydiving or base jumping, et cetera. But at the same time, we all know that we have to do our gear checks, and we do them several times. You're constantly you're reminded that what you're doing has consequences and you have to be on.
Sure.
And then we have all of the other life experiences that come along with it, losing friends and getting injured and things like that, that really put things in perspective. So
Sure.
yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot for us to give back to other people who don't understand.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, for anybody that's new to the sport and getting into the sport, you may have a superficial understanding that what you're doing is risky and that there are consequences, but you don't have to be in the sport very long for it to personally affect you in one way or the other. And especially now with base jumping has gotten as big as it has, and the sports are so
Yeah.
intertwined that it used to be every couple of years I might lose a friend in skydiving, and you could chalk it up to, oh, it's a rarity. I mean, it was just a fluke. It was a freak accident. But now so many of my friends are active base jumpers, and so many of the people that I've lost over the years, I've lost to base jumping that I don't even differentiate between the two anymore. It's just
Mhm.
another member of the air sports family that's gone.
Yeah.
So I don't think it takes long for you to have to come to that realization. And then the whole fear thing, well, if you've gone through and you've gotten your license, you've at least learned how to combat that fight or flight instinct to some degree, but it's always there. And I used to say that the worst era for skydiving was the no fear t-shirt era, where all the guys walked around with the no fear t-shirts and acted like that they were too badass to be scared. And I'd be the first one to go, I'm scared shitless, but I think I'm cooler because I actually went and did it anyway, and I was shitting myself the whole time. I love admitting that I had a real fear with something and managed to overcome it and still do at least well enough to survive in something.
I mean, humans are paradoxical, right? I mean, in order for us to feel alive, we have to have contrast, right? You have to really feel alive, to really feel anything. But at the same time, like when you scale that back for anyone who isn't in extreme sports, like people do things all the time that are in contrast to, you know, that kind of elevate, right? Maybe they'll go to the gym, maybe they'll go socialize, maybe they'll go on hikes, right? So they're doing something to break the monotony of what they feel, because that stagnation is going to make you feel nothing,
Sure,
right? So if you don't have any contrast. So what we are doing is kind of that, just a lot more,
sure, sure.
right?
Well, and I mean, the normal average person has to deal with fear, and there's no real differentiating between the fear that someone feels with a public speaking, gig as opposed to jumping out of an airplane. I think I read somewhere once that the fear of public speaking actually ranked higher than death. Like people are terrified of having to do something like that, but your body doesn't know the difference between being scared of getting on stage with a microphone or stepping up to the door of an airplane. You're just shitting yourself.
That's right. That's right. I heard that about heartbreak too. I heard that about many different things. I mean, like the brain's ability to to construct the sense of pain, right? I mean, it can be physical. It can also that's actually the premise of anxiety, right? So anxiety is not just what you feel like physically, it's the construction of a future driven thought, something that a situation that exists in some realm of the future may not even be in it's usually not realistic, right?
Mm,
Because it's never 100%. It's never going to happen 100%, no matter what you can conceptualize in your mind, right? Not accurately anyway, right?
mm.
Because we can't predict. But when we have such a vivid image in our mind, right, we start responding to it physically, right? And so that is where I kind of come in and work with people when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to younger jumpers,
Sure.
um, or clients that are coming back from, they can have thousands of jumps and they come back from, either a minor injury, a near-death experience where they were okay, or a critical injury, which is much more complex, right? And you have to, I think, also mitigate what is necessary fear, right? Like a threat, an actual threat versus a trigger,
Sure.
right? So all of these things are very difficult, and you have to kind of constantly get into the practice of talking it through. But it's no different than anything else. I'm not minimizing someone's trauma, but the physiological, the cognitive, and the emotional behavioral responses of the human body and the human themselves, it's pretty much the same how we respond, right?
Sure.
Mhm.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is I mean, you use a phrase like PTSD for, the trauma that you've gone through, and people automatically think soldiers in war or again a really horrific accident in skydiving and all that stuff. But PTSD can come from anything that's a real trauma to that specific person, and who's to define exactly what that might be? I
Right.
mean, one person's trauma is another person's Tuesday.
Yeah.
But you're going to react the same way. For me, one of the biggest things, realizations for me was to figure out that the way that I would exhibit signs of anxiety was through anger. I'd get pissed off if I was anxious. I turned into that guy, and it took me a very, very long time to realize, oh no, you were just incredibly anxious right then, and your natural reaction is to scream and yell and try and stomp it out.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
that kind of shit. But before we get too deep into that, you worked with the New York City prosecutor on trauma. Holy shit. That had to be something else.
Yeah, I worked there for 5.5 years, and
Wow.
mhm.
That you'd need therapy for yourself after that.
No.
Come on, that's got to be incredibly intense to put yourself in a situation where you're dealing with what are probably some of the most horrific things people can come up with.
Well, I worked for a nonprofit called Sanctuary for Families, and they're still up and running. They're one of the leading agencies in New York City. They're in all the five boroughs, and they do excellent, excellent work. But it wasn't just for domestic violence, because I was a domestic violence counselor, but it was in anti-trafficking, and it was in just a lot of gender-based violence issues, but for both men and women,
Sure.
and both domestically and internationally. So it gave me a chance to really learn about other countries and what was actually happening in terms of violence in other countries. And that that regarded like that statement alone, I think I used to hear it almost every week. Um, like how are you okay? Right. But the truth is that every single time, and it happens now too with my clients, but every single time that I'm in front of a person who is sharing with me, right? Number one, that person is in front of me, period.
Yep.
They are in front of me. They have gotten themselves in front of another person to speak out loud about their experiences. That you're already looking at a courageous person, period,
Sure.
right? And if you just use that and you stay with that when it comes to understanding a person, right? And you approach with curiosity. All that's left is resilience. And now you're just trying to find how resilient that person is on top of what they're already showing you.
Sure.
So every single time it's a high. Every single time it is an exhilarating experience where I'm honored to be holding that space for a person who has trusted me to tell me something that is incredibly complicated that they probably haven't told other people or have not articulated for themselves
Mm,
and are currently working through in real time. And that in real time, that experience is happening for both the client and for me or a therapist.
sure.
It is the most amazing thing in the world. And that's why I just want to do this until I'm old and I'm just going to do this forever because this kind of work, you're watching it unfold and blossom in front of your eyes
Sure.
while you're seeing people just heal and strengthen and fortify, but also not just recover, but discover. And it that's what keeps me wanting to, meet more people and talk to more people in their hardest states.
Now, in that field, and I don't know about other extreme sports that I'm not a part of, but I know that in skydiving, the first thing that comes to mind when dealing with any kind of trauma is not, oh, I need to talk to a therapist. It's usually, I'm gonna go have a beer and pretend that didn't happen. Um, so have you found that that you have people coming to you kind of on the sly, or is it something that people are actually pretty open to? Because at least from my generation of skydivers, the idea of having to go talk to someone because I had a really gnarly whatever just was never a thing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That actually, so when I first opened Alta, I was even conservative about how I would either approach people or talk about what I did. I had a lot of imposter syndrome because of that reason, because I didn't want to overstep
Sure.
people's comfort levels, right? I didn't want to be that person knocking on your door at Saturday morning, being like, "Hey, can we talk to you?" No one wants that. And still, I don't do that, right? Because if you take out anything extreme sports related, any kind of stereotype of what we believe, like our community and like how we are as people. You just take that all out, and then you're just talking about people, right? There are human beings who don't care for therapy, period,
Sure.
right? There are people who are pre-contemplative and not exactly sure, and they really have a lot of questions, but they're not open to answering. They're kind of like, I don't really know, because they're more holding on to that stereotype and just it's less about, I think nowadays, I think COVID completely blew this out of the water for the better, right? Because the floodgates were open with people who were asking for help, and that normalized, it changed the face of mental health support in
Mm,
general
mm,
worldwide. So that's at least one good thing that has come from the pandemic, is that there is a recognition that it is completely okay to talk about your stuff. There is a safe space, it's there, and now it's everywhere,
sure.
right? So so that helped a lot, because before it was very difficult to find men in practice, right? Like clients. I had maybe one or two, and I would think that they were unicorns, and it was like, oh my God, right? Because I want to be able to work with a lot more men. I think it's incredibly important, equally as much as women. So, and right now it's a 50-50 split in my practice. I
Nice.
actually, yeah, I see about 10 males, 10, 12, something like that. Yeah. Out of a caseload of like 30.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's also the industry itself, right? Because when you talk about people working in the sport, AFF instructors, tandem instructors, pilots, all this type of thing, you're talking about licensing and huge trust issues with the public being involved.
Yep.
And very briefly, I had an experience where I had a bout of vertigo while flying single pilot. Obviously, I managed to land the plane, but it was hands down the worst experience I'd ever had. But I
Yeah.
was a working licensed pilot. There is no talking to someone. That's literally, here's my license, that's the end of my career kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I had to muscle through it over years. And it took a lot of self-reflection and a lot of kind of talking behind the scenes because it's not acceptable in that arena.
Hmm.
And that's a really unfortunate thing. And I think that that mentality is pretty prevalent in a sport like skydiving because people are scared it's going to change their status in the sport. Even if it doesn't remove a license, it changes people's opinions of what they do. Oh, he's talking to someone. I don't know if he should be your instructor type of thing. Do you see that that's a hurdle that we can overcome?
100%. The only difference is that it would have to take social workers to create a lot of advocacy and lobbying against the policies. It would need policy change.
Hmm.
So you would have, and like, in order to do that, you would need, someone who's very good at creating programs showing efficacy. You would have to do things around, outside of insurance. I work outside and inside insurance, so I'm
Hmm.
both paneled and not. And I do work with pilots that have this issue. I'm actually
Oof.
very intimately yeah, I'm a big proponent of mental health, and the FAA does have a very archaic, draconian, backward system
Yes, they
that
do.
essentially says if you have medication that reduces your symptoms, that in and of itself makes you unfit, which is the most oppressive thing that I have ever heard of when it comes to mental health, right?
Yep.
Because there are people that have schizophrenia that have medication who are professors at Ivy League universities,
Sure. Sure.
right?
Well,
And,
I
and
mean,
that's an actual fact. There's a person that is a very big spokesperson. I don't, the name, I'm sorry, but it's
it's
real.
an unfortunate thing because I know a number of pilots that I've spoken to over the years that have had anxiety issues and had things
Sure.
like that that are very natural, especially in an incredibly high pressure job like flying. And then you take it to an even smaller community of jump pilots that are very high stress, red line up, red line down, really high pressure jobs that have
Hmm.
absolutely no way to vent. And I remember when it got to its worst, I took like a week off and self-medicated with a couple of Klonopin, and
Right.
it was the best I had felt in forever. And oddly enough, it was that week off and that I think I took two Klonopin that let me just calm down, step back and examine what was going on and kind of really dive into the parts that my brain wouldn't let me go into when I was so stressed out that finally helped me get past it. And all I could think when all that was going on was if the FAA knew anything about this, I'm just not a pilot anymore instead of helping along the way for people that need that kind of help. And I would think it would be the same with skydivers, especially instructors and stuff that would be scared to come forward because there is so much more on the line than just what they do for fun.
I'm glad we're talking about this because there's 2 points that I want to make. One, Klonopin being a benzodiazepine, right? Having access to that and having an observable reduction in your symptoms where you would then just get to the place where you have some peace and then you're able to actually process and have the wherewithal for yourself to at least get some sort of peg or a grip to kind of think about like, okay, wow, that contrast again, right? I have been undergoing a lot of stress. You know, the issue with benzodiazepines is that there's also a number of foods in addition to alcohol, which can be deadly when you mix them, right? But there's a lot of things that come with benzodiazepines that are not always the answer,
Mm,
but it took you to the point where it got so bad you end up, taking Klonopin, somebody takes a Xanax, whatever, and then or half of what in more colloquial terms, informal terms, you take half a bar,
yeah,
right? We've normalized using benzodiazepines for that rather than getting the actual like clinical space to talk about something like an SSRI, a small dose SSRI that would just level things out.
sure.
And and that's the problem where I think a lot of people are turning to they'll turn to drugs like recreational drugs. They'll turn to alcohol for sure. They'll turn to all of these other things. And then they also turn to pharmaceutical products that may actually, do some help, but also have implications, right? There's a right way to do this, and there's a,
Sure.
there's a structure that really should be monitoring a person, not in a parental way, right? But like in a way where you're genuinely, you're gently walking through the process of understanding what your brain, your emotions, your body needs and what your life circumstances need. And that it's not just curiosity, but like asking the right questions on a weekly basis really does give a very streamlined approach to someone's care,
Sure, sure.
right?
Well, it's odd to say, but I was very lucky in my own personal circumstances because as a younger guy, I had all the fun partying and raves and doing all that stuff. So I'd had the experience with all the recreational drugs and gone hard on the weekends, and so I knew that was it only offered a limited amount of relief, so to speak. So I didn't rely on the chemicals to solve the problem. I relied on the chemicals to allow me to solve the
Yeah,
problem. The big problem with benzodiazepines is they're so highly addictive, of course, because they get you to where you want to be, but then they don't continue to work. And I knew that going into it, but I was also one of the lucky few that would know that.
yeah,
Because let's face it, addiction with that kind of stuff is a trap. It sneaks up on you because it's helping, and then all of a sudden it's not helping anymore. And I was lucky enough that I knew that way ahead of time and was able
yeah,
to use it simply to take the edge off while I tried to figure out why I was still losing my shit long after the incident had finished. And this is, I mean, you hear PTSD, but you're like, well, I just had a really bad day. How could I possibly have that? And then you start to break it down and go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that was an incredibly traumatic experience. It's going to leave a mark.
that's right. That's right. That's the second point that I wanted to make. Our threshold for discomfort is significantly high, right? Not even in comparison, because there are people that are not in extreme sports that have a lot of experience, unfortunately, with, with abuse or, growing up in their development and everything, or having an acute circumstance like losing a family member tragically or something like that. Everybody has some kind of trauma to some degree. Some people just have it more than others. But when you do end up having um, a lifestyle where you are constantly, it's normalized to mitigate threat and you have to be on, right? You're essentially teaching yourself very much like active military. You are teaching yourself how to continue going in the face of discomfort, right? So when that happens, our threshold for and our tolerance for discomfort is just going to be higher and higher. We have really thick skin.
Sure.
We have to, right? And so the point in which someone says, ouch, I can't take this anymore, they've probably passed the point in which they actually needed to ask for help far, far later than when they really need to. And so going back to the original question that you said, that you asked me about, so what are, how do people reach out to you? How do you reach out to them? How do you have conversations with people? The first place is, I think, just observing anyone who has gotten to a point where they're open, because when someone's vulnerable, they're actually more, they're much more inclined to accept help, and they're inclined for change, right?
Sure.
It's a little bit of a science and an art at the same time, because you have to remain vigilant for what's out there. I'm constantly on Facebook. There's a lot of people I'm friends with on Facebook that I don't even know, and that's for good reason. I want to remain part of the community, and kind of know, who has the spinal injuries, who has the traumatic brain injury, who's crushed a pelvis, who has just gotten into these kinds of critical injuries, so that I can figure out what friends we have in common, and then just say like, hey, just letting you know this clinic exists, right? So that way we can support you, because that's usually the time when someone is much more open to it. Then there are people who have an appreciation, skydiving or not, right? As a person, they have an appreciation for mental health, and they love the idea, absolutely love the idea of working with someone who's in their community, who understands, and they could just jump right into talking to another person who's clinically trained, but also feels like they're talking to someone, you know, at a bonfire, at
Sure.
whatever. right? But of course, I take the approach as a clinician. So the tonality, the language, the explanations, the hearing, a lot of the skills that I use are kind of blended with that affability, right? Because it's part of the art. But I had this crazy imposter syndrome when I first started because I was like, I don't want to come across like I'm trying to sell something because
Sure.
ethically that's not what I want to do. This year for Invasion, I decided that I was going to have a table and be a vendor. Um, it was the most remarkable, most validating. I mean, I want to say, like, just personally speaking, it was the most validating thing of my entire career
Mm.
because that table was there next to, PD. I was right in front of PD. There's like all these other, vendors and stuff. But the amount of people that came to stay, and here's an interesting thing. We had candy, right? I had like all sorts of candies. I was like, someone's gonna like chocolate, someone's gonna like mints, and someone's gonna want bubblegum. And I had airheads, and airheads are the winner. So now I know. I was like, all right, people come for the airheads. Doug Barron stole all of them, so if he's listening, he owes me back. But but yeah, so I had them out there because I wanted to know who would come for candy and then leave just because they're coming for like some snacks, right? Who would come for information and then who would, maybe like take some candy after or whatever. What I've noticed was that people were actually there. Most people like did not care about any swag or little free things or whatever. They had actual questions, and I was talking to people for about 20 minutes each.
Mm.
I had a volunteer that was with me who was like, just girl, you're crushing it. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I just think that this is something that is sorely needed. And there is enough infrastructure. I've been conceptualizing this since 2016.
Mm.
And then I really put this in place in 2018, where I started building a business plan. And in 2021, it took until that long to actually create it correctly, right? So, yes, we work with some life coaches and a life coach that actually does breath work, but I'm clinically trained. I have 15 years of experience specifically in trauma, and what it's taken to make this clinic, to make Alta this sophisticated and this thoughtful about how to actually help somebody and think about all the implications, right? Because we are a small community. There's HIPAA violations that can happen left and right, right? There are so many different issues that you can run into. There's a lot of trauma that happens inside of the skydiving community, base jump community, that is not injury related and is not death related. Sexual assaults happen. There's a lot of different things, and it gets murky real
Sure.
fast. So I have a program manager, I have, legal advisors, I have like a business advisor, I have other clinicians that are under me as well. If the degree of separation is too close, I can't see people, right? But I do have other clinicians that will, and I directly supervise them. So it took a lot of years to create this infrastructure to make it serious and sophisticated enough where it was going to appropriately hold people and do the right work clinically by standards.
Sure. Well, I think honestly, as a sport, it's absolutely ripe for that kind of help from pretty much the very beginning. One of my favorite things, and I learned this more and more through writing for Blue Skies as long as I did, and then doing the podcast, was people want to know that they're not alone in their fears. That's the biggest thing that people seem to take away from my writing, but especially from the podcast, is I kept getting feedback that they would hear these rock stars in the sport, these absolute, just giants that appear to have no fear of anything, would come on the show and talk about when they were shitting their pants for this stunt or that stunt. And one of my favorite things as an instructor was, I used to call myself a 20-minute psychologist. In other words, I had 20 minutes from the time that I met my student to get them comfortable enough with me to let me throw them out of an airplane. And there's a real art to that. You have to learn each individual and your way in. And do these people respond to jokes, or do they want that reassuring whisper going, hey, everything's going to be okay? So you have to go through all of that. But it's so much more than just with that, first jump student. That goes all the way through up to and including coming back from a trauma or coming back from seeing something horrible happen and having to work your way through that. And so our sport lends itself to needing that support structure big time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So Alta Therapy has a couple of different programs, and it kind of supports people at different junctures in their journey or their careers, their trajectory into whatever sport, right? Because it's a generalist practice. So it's skydiving, base jumping, air sports, ocean-based sports or water-based sports, mountain sports, and motor. And then there's also called Soma, body sports like martial arts, contortion, ballet, things like that, because we also see a lot of eating disorders as well, wrestling.
Sure.
I even have like a former NHL player, PGA tournament competitors, like for golf. Like there's a lot of there's just people that come in, and if they need help, I'll help them as well. I try to keep it to the extreme sports community, but it's and the reason is, to your point, is that one of the things that I'm freshly working on right now is, I think, focusing some efforts on skydive coaching and taking those younger jumpers and integrating a lot more of the, not just sports psychology, but like, I think just having kind of a bird's eye view of someone's just general capacity for dealing with stress, and also taking in information. So how much they're able to retain, how do they learn? It's really, really important, because those instructors, those coaches are the gatekeepers, right? And there's a lot of good opportunity for flagging people that need extra support.
Sure.
And one of the things that I would love to do is not only to work with someone in the sky, just so that they can learn how to jump with other people, after AFF, but to kind of figure out, well, basing off of what I'm seeing, these are the key areas where I think you should probably work on for yourself, whether that's in the sport or outside of it. So that way we're working towards safety, and you can ensure that this isn't going to be something that turns into a bad habit, or it's something that kind of follows you through, right? Because there's new jumpers there was one jumper that I can recall was given a weight belt, never should have been given a weight belt, was given a weight belt, was fidgeting with the weight belt, came in and broke their ankle just because of the amount of stimulation and all of the gear and all of the, because they were rather small.
Sure.
Right. So there's something like that. And then there's also new competitors, people who, have big dreams for themselves and don't really know how to deal with their egoic structure that comes up, and like how to, listen to part of it, but then also not let that guide you. And there's a lot of very fine tools. I consider myself almost like consider it like surgery, right? With nerves. So if you're a neurologist, you're only getting into very particular places. You have to be super precise on what you want that person to understand that like is coming up for them, so then they can notice it time and time and time again, because they're going to be able to address it.
Sure.
Right? Even something like the breath and oxygenating the body, that's going to, regulate that parasympathetic nervous system is incredibly important. That's a huge tool, and it's simple, right? So there are 4 programs at Alta. One of them, 2 main wings. One is the sports psychology wing, and the other is the general psychotherapy wing, right? And in sports psychology, this sort of space, there is support for newer jumpers for skydive coaching. Currently working on more of a curriculum, kind of just getting aggregate data of like experiences and things that I'm hearing for people, because I do want to create a manual that'd be excellent to kind of just have about, what I've been understanding for all newer jumpers, and kind of like cataloging it. And that way we can kind of understand, this is what's going on, when someone's learning information, and you're basically telling them all of the risks that are involved, right?
Sure.
They have this idea of themselves that they really want to, but they have no idea that in about 1 or 2 years or 4 years or 6 or 10 years, they're going to lose a lot of their friends. They might actually get hurt and brought into the hospital. A lot of things will happen, right? So I I want to create something for both instructors, coaches, and then also for students to just have, and it's like a catalog of anecdotal experiences that I've taken from working with people. So that's kind of what I'm working on. That's I don't really have intention of working in the sport just to work in it,
Sure.
but it's for that reason. The other is working with competitors, and that's where it gets fun,
Hmm.
right? That's the fun part, right? Because we get super creative on how to, um, do this in vivo exposure to stress and kind of like recreate a competition environment. And we get very creative on metrics, and you can nerd out for days there,
Sure.
right? Because, and then, but you do need to also kind of monitor the person's stress levels and also brain fatigue and know what those numbers are for how long it takes a person to learn before they can't retain information anymore. It's about 90 minutes and then we need to take breaks, right? There's certain things that understanding the way that generally the way that brains work, I get like on the whole is really important. So that's where like the fun is, right? And you want most of the psychology to be in this space, right? But the truth is that the important part is on this side is the other wing, which is the general psychotherapy. And when you have the support for general psychotherapy, you just have a therapist and you're talking to them on a weekly basis, and that person kicks back to you what they're hearing because they can flag things that you otherwise would just sort of swipe, and dismiss the notification because of that threshold, that tolerance for distress and discomfort, right? And that person's kicking things back to you. The idea is that we prevent the last program, which is the biggest one, and this is the one that I'm most passionate about, which is a critical injury program, right? And that is where orthopedic social work comes in. That's where understanding the extreme sports athlete, the practitioner, and then you have to know how to read MRI reports. I have to be I'm reading X-ray reports, MRI reports. I'm talking to surgeons, talking to OT, PT, any of the nurse practitioners. I'm talking to psychiatrists. I'm talking to the doctors, the rehabilitation staff. I'm making referrals to renowned hospitals. I'm I'm really, really involved in each and every person's medical case because you have to be before you start working with the emotions, because you cannot tell a person that has spinal injury or traumatic brain injury or has a pelvic injury, which have these secondary and tertiary issues that will span out and affect everything from organs and functioning to daily life and basic tasks. Let's just talk about your feelings and don't worry, we'll get you to cognitively reframe. CBT doesn't work just for someone in that kind of state. It's much more robust. And that's the program that I am full throttle, really, really care about the most, because it's incredibly important, because there are so many like profiles that show up, like posts on Facebook and Instagram, GoFundMe's, right? All of these people are getting hurt, and then they deal with 1 or 2 or 5 years later down the line the same injuries, and they're dealing with it while trying to get back into the sport. And then you have the fatalities that happen because people are pushing. They are in a place where they are now dealing with chronic pain. They're angry. They have all of these emotions. It's immeasurably complex to even try to explain it. You just have to see it and you have to really understand viscerally what a person goes through, right? They're much more prone for getting into further injuries later because of their mental state, and they don't even realize it,
Sure.
right? And so, one of the biggest losses that we've had recently, I mean, we had Jonathan Bazillion, he was a friend, and there's that. And then there's Compton, Caitlin
Compton, yeah.
Compton.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So like it's not okay. And there is and it's here,
Yeah.
right?
I actually was just thinking about her the other day because I had her on the show while she was in recovery. And of course, we talked about her start in the sport and how she got started with everything, her true passion and everything. Then we talked about the accident, and you could hear the drive and determination in her to get back in the air. And there was a big part of me that was like, yes, I absolutely understand why you want to get back in the air. But then there was the older guy that's been there, done that, that's like, but you're pushing super hard to get back to this, which I think is commendable, but at what cost is where I start to think. And I'm not a base jumper, so I try and separate myself a little bit from that and go, okay, I understand, but I don't understand. Um, and I that's kind of where I let myself stop. I kind of go, okay, you guys know something I don't know. And so when I see someone like Compton, who I met just like you, I met for the podcast, and we had a great conversation, but I walked away from that going, wow, I kind of something in me wishes she wasn't pushing to get back to that so hard so fast. And then when I
Mhm.
heard that she passed on a base jump, I was just bummed. I was just like, oh, that's the last thing in the world that I wanted to hear, and it's not the least bit surprising to me. And that's a really sad thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, we can look at our metrics, and wingsuit base jumpers are incredibly good at this, right? I mean, the majority of them are just very, very good at, doing their homework for following all their lines, and they are all about numbers, and they're all about precision. They're incredibly intelligent people.
Oh yeah,
It takes a lot to do this, right? You're not just full send, I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody does that. You have a lot of experience, and she did too. And I will say this, you can look at all of your metrics, you can have all of your math down pat, right? And there are times that, because it's happened to me and I own Alta Therapy, right? You can still get hurt if you are holding pain, if you are holding any kind of emotional or mental preoccupation. I don't know what happened on this jump because I've been out of the country. So one of the things I think I need to do, because I'm very curious, is to actually, read the report and understand what happened. So
sure.
that's something that I am going to do because I really want to understand what happened there, mechanically or like logistically, literally, um, because I think it's important. So I'm not speaking to what happened on that jump because I don't
Sure.
know.
Sure.
But what I do know is when I speak to clients that are currently active in my practice and they come from, having these very serious injuries, there is a way to break this down. There is a way to break down the very small steps that you have to take. And it is a grueling process because it asks for so much of your patience. And all of this anxiety comes up and it tells you, you're never going to ever be who you were again, and you're never going to get back there. And it's my job to believe otherwise, but with logic and precision in a different way. And it still doesn't guarantee that people aren't going to go in.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, there's never going to be a guarantee. I mean, that's that's the unknown that we have to accept in taking on these sports and
Yeah.
accepting one of the things that I don't think anybody's told when they start, but I certainly wasn't told when I started in the late 90s was you're gonna get hurt, whether it's a traumatic injury or just wear and tear after years of beating the shit out of yourself. And I do not know a skydiver that's been in the sport for any length of time that doesn't deal with some form of chronic pain. Um, I have four discs that have been fused and replaced in my neck. I have a bad shoulder. Everything that all of the skydivers have, and it's a real hard thing to grasp when you wake up one morning realizing that that daily pain you're going through is going to be there to some degree forever, and you bought and paid for it years before, and that's tough to wrap your head around. And that's a big thing, I think, going into it. People don't understand, especially with something like chronic pain, how all encompassing it can be and how much it can wear down on your daily mental health until you can wrap your head around this is what I need to do, that's what I need to do. All these little things that kind of help along the way. But when you tackle it all on your own, the pain, anxiety, and all that stuff just on your own, holy shit. It's a
Yeah.
lot to deal with for even the strongest person.
Right, right. So it's a spiral in any direction. You can spiral up slowly or you can spiral downward, right? Depending on if you're going to medicate for yourself or you can figure things out completely on your own.
Yep.
Or if you're actually going to connect to community, to care community and have a team that's really going to help you. And you're not doing it alone, right?
Yeah.
And the bottom line here is that we are social beings. We absolutely need each other. We absolutely need to rest on each other. And if you come from a background where you are hyper independent and part of your reasons for doing anything of what you're doing, especially in any of these sports, is so that you can learn to trust yourself more and more, be careful with that because that I can trust myself. I do base jumps alone. I don't really need people. I don't really like people, or I prefer to be alone. All of these things, it needs to come with a balance because when something happens, if you are only trusting on yourself and then you are compromised, there are other people that can make it a lot easier. And there's also other people that can reflect back what they're seeing, and they have more resources, solid, actual resources to get that person to not only recover, but discover more things about themselves that
Sure.
you can reframe, right? So that's the most amazing part of this work, right? When you have someone who was told they're never going to walk again, right? And somehow they are able to not only reframe their mentality, but they're dealing with chronic pain. They're going to, but they have a lot of support, and now they have an entire regimen in the system to deal with it in the morning, afternoon, and evening. They have really nifty ways of dealing with medication management. There's things to remember. There's a lot of other medical gear that now becomes part of a person's lifestyle, and part of their like necessity. The same thing as we use deodorant and toothbrushes.
Sure.
It's not less of a person. It's just that they have more things that they have to do,
Sure.
right? So streamlining all of that. You can't do that by yourself. You shouldn't have to do that by yourself.
Absolutely. Well, the first person that jumps to my mind is Jarrett Martin. I don't know if you know him out of Arizona, but Jarrett was a skydiver and instructor in Hawaii, and actually he was speed flying and ended up with a spinal injury and lost the use of his legs, and bounced back in such an incredible way, and got back into skydiving, got back into competing, became a master rigger, now builds rigs, jumps all over the world. He and I worked together in Dubai. He was rigging out there and jumping and doing all these special events and stuff. And I only ever knew Jarrett in the chair. And talk about just this incredibly mentally powerful, open, just wonderful guy that had clearly found a way to accept what had happened and move on with things. And you meet somebody like that, and it makes waking up sore in the morning a hell of a lot easier to deal with. It really does. And then just for me personally, having a bunch of crotchety old skydivers that get to talk every once in a while and bitch about how much everything hurts, it's amazing. Just to be able to have that vent and to have someone that not just understands, but is where you are. As odd as that sounds, knowing that your buddy is waking up just as sore as you makes everything just that little bit better, which is, it's fucked up, but it's wonderful.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
really
that's
is.
the premise of groups, right?
Yeah.
Group workshops and yeah, absolutely. Um, Me and I don't, do you know Brandon Grew?
I don't know the name. That doesn't mean I don't know him though.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So he's a skydiver, but he also runs breath work workshops.
Okay.
And I think his title is life coach, but what he does is he has one branch where it's he helps people like recover the grief of breakups, all degrees. And
Sure.
then he also does breath work. And these breath work workshops became totally spotlighted when he ran a group for 22 Jumps for base jumpers. And 22 Jumps is a nonprofit. Maybe you know, maybe listeners don't know. But 22 Jumps is a nonprofit that essentially raises money for traumatic brain injury with veterans. And it is a base jumping event that happens in Arizona and also in the Prime Bridge in Idaho. And they also do a retreat in, I believe it's Moab. And these three different locations are all around the veteran experience and kind of bridging community, but it's really run by base jumpers. Kiernan was the veteran who passed away from traumatic brain injury, and his brother is the one who owns and runs. He's the founder, along with his friend, uh, the name is escaping. I think it's Dustin, but I'm not raw. I don't know. You'd have to Google it. I'm so sorry. They're gonna kill me. But 22 Jumps is an excellent event. And then Brandon did this work for I wasn't there, so I think it was I want to believe that this was co-ed, but he also runs a men's group as well. And the majority of his efforts are focused on getting anyone who has a very protected, closed self, right, to open up and become vulnerable. And when you get someone to breathe and but in a very particular way, right, the brain responds to certain modalities of breathing, certain cadences, right? And so we use this in sports psychology, but what Brandon does is that he actually gets people to experience catharsis, right? This opening of a lot of emotions. And it can be incredibly cathartic for the person who's experiencing it. And it's a very emotional experience. And that way you get someone to actually talk. And so he got, yeah, and he has done this time and time again, but he is very much part of the base jumping, and I think he's also a base jumper, but he's a base jumping and skydiving community. Um, and he's gotten like a lot of people to engage in introspection because they don't even know what they're holding at the time.
Sure. Now, thinking of things along the lines of breath work and stuff like that leads me down the road of thinking about psilocybin assisted therapy, MDMA assisted therapy. What are your opinions on stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah. So that's an excellent question. So you definitely need to triage and do intake because when you have a history, I don't want to lead with the risks and make it as if I'm not a proponent in some way. Because Johns Hopkins University has been doing this for over 24, 25
Oh
years at this
yeah,
point.
I've followed their studies. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a considerable amount of information that really does prove that in a clinical controlled setting where you do have structure and there's intention, but there's also a lot of clinical backing that you understand how to use it and how to prompt someone and walk someone through, it can be incredibly beneficial,
mm.
right?
Well, I
And
mean,
and, and so
it's that shortcut, right? It's the shortcut to getting someone to open up that might be closed in other circumstances.
yeah, so you would understand how the brain works, right, neurologically, and in order to be a good candidate, to be an appropriate candidate, a person would have to have no, I mean, you can't have anything where your reality is fragmented. So
Yeah, no
bipolar,
schizophrenia, none of that.
no schizophrenia, no schizophreniform, no major depression where there's psychosis, no fragmentation of reality,
Sure.
right? Because that's where it can be incredibly detrimental. And then also you do want to gauge for someone's history or relationship with addiction,
Sure.
right? Because it's and so there's all of these other things. There's trauma. So you want to be asking the right questions about um someone's associations and how, to de-escalate them if they end up triggering, right? You have to have these clinical, I think, skills to be able to take care of the person that you're going to be working with.
Sure.
But when it's done right, I do actually think that it's very efficacious, right? With the right people on
Well,
both ends.
I know that the big risk is if you have someone with any previous history that, bipolar or schizophrenia or something like that, what you're risking is that psychotic break. If you don't have that, you're still potentially risking a horrid bad trip, which could in itself do some damage. That being said, having followed the Johns Hopkins stuff, they've done a lot of amazing therapy with that, and in everything from OCD to crippling anxiety and stuff like that. So I'm hopeful that down the road that will be something that's more embraced because I really do see a future in that. And that's also speaking from someone that on a recreational basis has had more than my fair share of experiences that have led to be very healing in themselves. So that's my personal experience, but that doesn't mean go out and buy a bag of mushrooms and eat them. That's not what I'm saying by any
Right.
means. But I really do. I hope that the future holds proper assistance with stuff like that because I really do think it's in the right direction. Now, all
Yeah.
that being said, I still haven't asked you how the fuck you got started in skydiving and extreme sports. That's supposed to be my first damn question, but I got too interested in the rest of this shit. So before we go any deeper, how'd you get started in anything extreme, not just skydiving?
Okay, so funny story. My dad would always, okay, you really want to know? My
Yeah,
dad would always wear like these Speedos. I'm Greek, right? So he was a big dude. Now imagine a big dude with like
I've
gold
got
chain,
that.
right? Mako
Yeah.
Mako too. And he'd be on the beach or whatever, and he'd be wearing this little Speedo, or whatever, just like, and for the longest time, man, he would always be talking about judo. He was like, I do judo and whatever. And he would like be flipping me and he's like, drop say nagi. And like, I wouldn't even know what on earth he was talking about. I just wanted him very far away from me because he would be throwing me everywhere. Right. And it took me getting into jujitsu. A friend of mine was like, you should really do this because I did ballet for 19 years and then I dropped it just for school and I had nothing. I was super just sedentary. And I was like, man, I think I want to get into boxing. I want to do something. And he's like, get into jujitsu. I was like, what the heck is a jujitsu? And he's like, you should just try it. And I was like, all right, fine. So he tells me the school to go to. I ended up going to the Henzo Gracie Academy in New York City. And that's where I trained for 6 years before I left to move to Florida. And that is my main academy. I'm very loyal to them and I love them. But it took me, I think, my first year up until I think I was like, what, 25 to figure out that my dad was not a sumo wrestler.
That's fucking funny.
So I was like learning judo and I'm like, oh, my dad's a badass. And he had a black belt in judo. And he was like, I'm a judoka. And I was like, are you kidding, Dad? Stop telling people that you do judo. It's embarrassing. And he's like, judo is a beautiful sport. I'm like, oh my freaking God, dude. Like, please don't. And I was always mortified, completely mortified. So he comes and he shows up in one of my classes and we start standing up, we do judo. Very, very basic. I'm a white belt at this point. And then, go to the ground and, continue with jujitsu. So jujitsu is honestly an amalgamation of judo, wrestling, and jujitsu.
Sure.
Right. So, the only part that he actually approved of was the judo. He's like, this is the beautiful part. And then you get on the floor, you ruin it. Why are you doing that? Um, but yeah, so I know it's been in me, but from jujitsu, that first year I met someone, another Greek person, right? His name is Costa, Gus, and he came from Greece and he's training, and I hear his thick Greek accent, right? If he hears us again, there's so many people who are gonna like, want to kill me after this, but it's fine. I hear his Greek accent and I was like, oh my God, he's Greek, 100%. So I go up to him and I was like, hey, do you want to roll? And after we were rolling, I asked him, I was like, you're Greek. So we start speaking in Greek and he's like, yeah. He's like, you live here? And I was like, yeah. I was like, what do you do? He goes, I'm a skydiver. I was like, you work for NASA? And he's like, no, I promote clubs in like Mykonos. And I was like, oh, but like, were you an engineer? And he's like, no. I was like, what okay, so what do you mean you're a skydiver? Like you just skydive? And he's like, well, yeah, I take video in the sky. I was like, you could take pictures in the sky. And he's like, oh my God, this is like I would like helpless person in front of me. And he's like, you should try it. I was like, oh no, I'm very bad at math. And he's looking at me like I'm completely just,
Right.
brain dead. And he's like, why don't you come down to Florida with me? And I was like, I don't know you. No. So then I thought about it. I thought about it. He was essentially going to Skydive Sebastian, and his whole entire thing was he wanted to be a videographer. He was studying for his PPL. He was going to get his commercial. I mean, now it's like, yeah. And he was going to try to work on a visa to work, but he was hitting up all of the major drop zones. So obviously Chicago, he was up in New York, all of these other things. And he was going to go to Paris, kind of scope out America and kind of see where it would make
Sure.
sense. I get into the winter of New York. This is like 3 months later. And I was like, F it. I'm gonna call this guy. I'm messaging him on Facebook and I'm gonna go down there. I want to try the skydiving thing out. Now I had I think I was still in grad school. No, I wasn't in grad school. In grad school, I had seen a Red Bull commercial and I saw wingsuiters, like proximity flyers, like for the first time. Had no idea that that was even humanly possible. Lost my shit. And I was like, that's insane. Like that's absolutely insane. Lost it completely. And I was like, all right, cool. So I had that in the back of my mind. And I hit him up and I'm like, hey, I want to skydive. And he's like, heck yeah, man, let's go. And I was like, all right, awesome. If he wasn't Greek, if he wasn't part of the jiu-jitsu community, I mean, like, I don't know, there's no reason for me to go follow some dude down in a place that I've never met. Like, I'm not doing that. But it was safe enough. And we're still platonic friends until this day. Like, I owe him everything because, I mean, my whole entire life changed because of that conversation.
Mm.
So we go down, super overcast. There's a picture of me waiting for a tandem, and I'm sitting like this. And they're like, do you want to go to Universal Studios? And I was like, no, I don't want to freaking do that. I'm sitting here until the skies open up. Skies ends up opening up. Um, and then we go up. I was super calm, wasn't nervous at all because I was using breathing techniques.
Sure.
And then I just made that decision. And I was using all my CBT techniques as a little clinician in the DA's office. And and yeah, so like I end up getting out of the door. I was like, fuck it. I mean, I'm here. There's nothing else to do. Like, I can just let go.
Mm.
So we end up going or whatever. The instructor behind me was like, you did great. Have you thought about AFF? I was like, what the fuck is an AFF now? I was
Yeah.
like, no, I haven't thought about any of it. So we get down. He invites me to come back. That was January of, oh man, I'm gonna mess up the years. 2015, 16, something like that. No, 15 is I see, I can never remember when I started jujitsu, if it was 2014 or 15, and the other one was a year later. So
Mm.
skydiving must have been one of those. But but yeah, so that was January. And then it was in July that I came back. I did AFF. I got my A and my B in September. And then,
Nice.
should take my D license because whatever. But
Sure. Well, it's funny
yeah.
that you say that jujitsu kind of helped you prepare for skydiving because it was the reverse for me. Skydiving prepared me to start doing jujitsu. As Omar Al-Hijalan was a buddy of mine in Dubai and went to the Gracie school there and got me to come roll with him. And the first time you're in a bit of a hairy situation rolling, you are going to revert back to, whatever training helps somewhere. And it was learning how to breathe and stay calm and relax in skydiving that was like, this guy's about to turn my head the wrong direction. Just stay calm and do this, this, and that. And so it's funny because it ties in together, right? I mean, it's very much. I mean, I hate to say it, jujitsu, maybe not as much as skydiving, but skydiving is physically pretty easy as far as sports go. There's only so much that goes into the mechanics of skydiving.
Unless you're swooping.
Unless you're swooping, yeah, then you're talking about a bit more. But even with that, it becomes largely a mental game. I mean, skydiving is the most mental physical sport that I can think of.
Mhm.
Right along with, big wave surfing and all that. Obviously, you have to know the basics, but then you kind of set your body on autopilot and keep your brain where it needs to be. And it's very much the same with jujitsu, although physically a lot more goes into jujitsu than skydiving.
Yes, yes. And I think there are elements for everything. Like one of the things that I've done is actually verge out from focusing so much on skydiving, because I was competing pretty seriously for about 6 years in jujitsu.
Mm.
And I would try to compete every month. I would, travel. I was like, that was my life for a long time. COVID changed a lot of things and then I restructured it. I had to. But yeah, so yes, we're kind of flipped in that sense, but mountaineering for me, I think, is really where I'm homing in a lot of my passion as an athlete. There's also some work, we might not have time to get into it now, but I'm doing some mountaineering work and humanitarian work with Tanzania and raising proceeds to, fund education and educational
Nice.
materials in
Nice.
Busha. Yeah. And so like it goes from, my not sumo wrestling father, who actually was an immense, badass, and he passed away in 2018, but that's man, he he raised me right, at least with a mentality, but I wish I would have had influence and like memories with him, like actually
Sure.
teaching me, not throwing me around. But it brought this kind of like kindred feeling that I felt like I needed to, because from jujitsu, I never missed a day,
Mm,
right? I was like, I'm doing it. And I love the sport more than I have such a passion for it, right?
mm.
So jujitsu brought me into skydiving. Skydiving let me meet so many other people. And then I met a very good friend of mine, Justin Matichak, who owns Veterans Adventure Group. And it's a mountaineering group for veterans. And he was, just generous enough to be like, hey, do you want to come join us? And so I summited Mount Hood with them as my first real summit. And that mountaineer experience, I learned how to ice climb. I learned how to self-arrest on the mountain. I learned so many other things. And then I also learned a lot about myself.
Mm.
And then I mean, right now I'm just coming back from Tanzania and I climbed Kilimanjaro and that's where I
Awesome.
was like, yeah. So climbing, diving, and I haven't even talked about free diving.
Eh,
We are all connected with that, right?
Sure.
So yeah.
It's funny that mountaineering and climbing is so high on your list because I'm actually in training now. My wife and I are going to go summit Island Peak in
Oh, cool.
Nepal in April.
Wow,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, yeah. That'll be my first proper climb. I've done two trips to Nepal where I've done Everest Base Camp and over Chola Pass and Kalapatar and Gokyo Ri. But this will be the first time actually going, and I'm actually going with a skydiving group because I all the connections that I made through my friends that are with Everest Skydive are also the same that run the company that's going to be the group to take us up. So it's great because I have an opportunity to go with people that I trust in a community that I know. And because I'm a novice in it, Island Peak is like the perfect mountain. It's the first time above 20,000, so I'm super excited about that. It's gonna be nice. I'm
That
stoked.
is excellent. Yeah, I'm stoked for you.
Yeah, I'm super excited. And it's kind of funny because the first time that I did the trek to Everest, it kicked my ass because I had no idea what I was doing. I did the whole thing solo, carried all my gear, barely made it to base camp, had a huge nasty cough, but I remember getting to base camp and you can just barely see the tip of Everest from base camp. It's the worst view of Everest in the whole area. But standing there looking up going, "Fuck, this is where it starts." Like I made it
Yeah.
it took me this to make it to the starting line. And it was actually a very freeing experience because I stood there and with perfect clarity realized I never want to try and climb that thing. But to do something like climb Island Peak, which is a reasonable summit with an amazing view of the highest mountain in the world, that sounds spectacular. Being on top of Everest, fuck that.
Yeah, yeah. It's also, I mean, it's so like overly trekked and everything too. I mean, yeah, whatever. You don't need it.
I mean, it's a beautiful trek and all that, but yeah, all you have to do is see a one picture of, I think it was the 2019 summit that the one guy that did the 14 summits took the picture of the line going up around Hillary Step up to the summit, and it was just hundreds of people in line. And wait, I'm gonna go stand in line for the opportunity to maybe die? Nah, that's okay. But the rest of it is amazing, and it's the same thing, right? It all boils down to mentality because it's just one foot in front of the other, and how much pain are you willing to endure to get where you want to go? And I've said it to a number of people that have asked what it's like. I'm like, it's the most wonderful misery I've ever suffered through.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yep.
That's
And
absolutely right. That's
I
real
like
experience.
I already know how much it's going to suck on the way up, and it's going to suck even worse on the way down.
Oh
But
yeah.
when I'm back to base camp after having done it, that will be the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so much fun. So we barely talked about skydiving. We talked about everything else. So I have a feeling there's gonna have to be a round two on the podcast because there really are a lot of things that I still would like to talk about. But in the meantime, I want you to share how people can get a hold of you on social media, email, all that kind of stuff. Someone maybe looking for some help or someone interested in your coaching program, somebody that wants to talk about jujitsu or mountain climbing. How do they find you?
Yeah, so you can go on to Alta, ALTA therapy, THERAPY.org. Altatherapy.org is the website. We're actually revamping it to be, it's good enough now. It should be clear enough, but since we opened up all these programs, I'm going to do a total revamp. Actually, we're finishing it this week. Super excited for this launch because it's about like 2 months we've been working on it. So it'll be packed with information on each program. You can also, if anyone is interested, I would always appreciate support from the community of just liking us on Facebook. So it's Alta Therapy. I believe there's no underscore. I don't think there is. I should probably know these things, right? But my program manager knows. Cora, what does Cora say? It's funny. We have nope, it's just Alta Therapy, ALTATHERAPY. And for sure, and a lot of people even just find me on Instagram. My Instagram, just because of the role that I play, I don't post a lot of like very personal whatever. I don't use my social medias for any of that.
Sure.
So if it's easier to find me, Chloe.Kalo, that's a lot of people just message me there,
Sure.
but then I'll reroute. And then I'm on helloalma.com, so people can find me there. But my last name proper is SV, like Victor, OLAKOS. My first name is Chloe, CHLOE. So when you type that into helloalma.com and you find a provider, you can actually request a consultation directly there.
Oh, nice. Well, as we briefly discussed, just via messaging back and forth, I'm a huge proponent of mental health, especially in our sport. I think that it's something that gets way too overlooked. And I think that it should be something we can talk about a hell of a lot more openly. And I mean, skydiving and extreme sports in general tend to draw into it people with very extreme personalities and from all walks of life, and a lot of the times they have stuff that they're running away from, and they end up in a space like skydiving or base jumping because it's an escape from something else. But we all know people that did exactly that, and they can't run away from problems forever, even in a community like skydiving and base jumping. And I've sadly have friends that have chosen to leave us rather than continue to deal with things, even though they were wonderful in the sport. You never know what someone's going home to. So I think having it out there where people have some place to go or someone to reach out to is a huge thing. And I think we'd all probably still have friends around that aren't with us now had they had someone to talk to. So I love that you're doing this. I love that it's aimed towards our community specifically, and I hope that it takes off like a rocket.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks. I hope so too for everybody. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I know I sprung the recording on you. You thought we were just going to talk about what we'd talk about, but this was exactly where I wanted it to go. I've said it a million times. This podcast is not so much about skydiving as it is the people who do what we do and what they're all about. And in that respect, this was absolutely perfect. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope everything goes great, and I can't wait to see what comes next.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks.
Chloe, take care.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Another episode of the Lunatic Fringe podcast, brought to you as always by, well, wait, not as always, actually. Brought to you now by Gyro. Formerly known as NZ Aerosports, you'll head to gyro.com for their next level line of canopies. By Pussfoot, the Extreme Sports Collective. Head over to pussfoot.com to check it out. By Summit Parachute Systems, check out summitparachutesystems.com to talk to Jarrett Martin and the gang about kick-ass pilot rigs, rigging courses, and more. By Flyaway Indoor Skydiving, go to flyawaytn.com and check out all the cutting-edge stuff to come. By Pure Spectrum CBD, head to purespectrumcbd.com to check out their wide range of CBD products. And as for us, head to the lunaticfringepodcast.com to listen to any of the hundreds of episodes currently available, hit the link for our YouTube channel, pick up your copy of the Lunatic Fringe book or The Accidental Stripper, and get a sneak peek at upcoming guests. Once again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Damn.